and shoulder pads, wasn't it? Did you love the hairdos, wasn't it?
I can't believe we had hair like that.
There was big hair, big shoulder pads.
Big expo. It was, we were right on the thing.
It was a massive expo. And Barbara, when I was getting ready to I was looking at what you achieved during that time, the stats are actually quite extraordinary, because I mentioned it was leisure in the age of technology, but literally in 1988, we all know if we were there that there really wasn't that much of it. I'd love to know how on earth you managed to coordinate 25,000 shows over 6 months, with many of them being international acts, to an audience of over 15 million without a smartphone, without an Excel spreadsheet, and no email.
No email. Well, you know, there were still letters. Pigeons, there were still phone calls that you could make. But you're right, just in looking back through some paperwork over the last few days, I thought, did I imagine that, or is that how we did it? But that's how we did it. And I found just some A4 sheets of paper, and we had made spreadsheets using rulers and pens, drawn up these pages with people's names and when they'd be performing and what they'd be paid and all the rest of the details there. And that's how we put our schedules together. We'd send them over to our contracts department, they'd draw up the contracts on the basis of that, and they'd make payments on the basis of that. So pretty much 25,000 performances were scheduled quite reasonably successfully on pieces of paper.
That's an understatement. Bob, I mentioned that for 5 years you were a part of the lead-up into Expo, and it's fair to say that in those years that was immediately before, when development started to happen, there was a fair amount of negative press. There was more than one occasion when everybody was expecting it to be a spectacular flop.
No. In fact, I was sitting there wondering, we're going to be back here in 40 years' time, because I think the most extraordinary thing about Expo, I mean, this has been Expo Week, this has been the festival of Expo, is how it's affected so many people over those years and is still affecting them. I think Expo had the most enormous emotional and even spiritual effect on people. Everybody who was around remembers Expo, and it's meant different things to different people. I was up in Kingaroy earlier this week because they've got an Expo museum which we launched in Kingaroy, and of course, dear Joe, home of, and all that sort of thing. But the chap said to me there, the man who was the general manager chain of the South Burnett Times, was a little boy during Expo, and he reminded me, which I had actually forgotten, that we had initiated a program of home billeting, homestays, asking people in Brisbane if they would have people to stay. And his family did have people to stay, and he said, it changed my whole life. He said, I've got friends from all over the world, and I met all these people from all over the world. And so I think it was that time of enormous happiness. People remember being happy. Thanks to you, Barbara, and thanks to you, Bob, for everything like you said well. But people remember being happy, and that's a memory they've carried with them. And it's a very important thing to hold in your heart.
I think it's fair to say that everybody was floored by the number of people who visited Expo, particularly those with season passes. And I'm not one to keep memorabilia, but I have my season pass. I found it, and I'll show it to you later. I've got a beautiful Nick Kershaw flat top.
Everyone was really determined to make it the best.
And there are people here today, Laurie Smith over there, Leo Simeas, who was the Greek pavilion, Stefan, of course. So many people, Expo means so much to them, but they all contributed, even if they weren't sort of officially contributing.
Yep. Everybody was determined to make it great.
Sallyanne, as Lord Mayor at the time, we talk about how there was this shift in Brisbane's culture and psyche after World Expo finished. Can you give us a bit of a, from your point of view at City Hall, what was the part just after Expo like?
Well, I guess, and Graham will remember it, of course, because he was in City Hall. I'm not sure whether you were Chairman of Finance. He was Chairman of Finance, so it was all about the money. What we had realised early on was that what happened after Expo was going to be tremendously important. Expo was going to be a wonderful party, but that site is unique, was unique, is unique. Nowhere else in the world has that amount of land on the banks of a river, close to the city. And we thought about this before, because I'd been to Vancouver, and Vancouver was in a panic during the Expo because they hadn't thought about it afterwards. So we brought somebody back to talk about afterwards. And we had a clear idea of what we as a council wanted. But luckily, I reckon that was the first example of people power. The people of Brisbane, the people of Queensland, people who'd been to that site, virtually rose as one and said, no, that has to be kept, because Joe had promised that Expo wouldn't cost a cent. In fact, I've still got the newspaper cutting.
I'll never believe it.
Won't cost a cent. And he would have liked to have sold it off for commercial development, which would have been horrendous if you think about it, because not only is the site itself unique, but it's got art gallery, museum, theatres, now this, all at sort of one end of it. And luckily for me, I live at the other end of it.
So you must be reminded of Expo every day when you go for your walk.
I think isn't that wonderful? The South Bank Park, and of course, one of the arguments I used to have with Russ Hinds at the time, because we needed money from the government, was, well, why should I put all that money into the city of Brisbane? And I'd go, no, this is for the whole of Queensland. And it has been indeed, and when I walk down there now, there are people from all over the world enjoying the swimming pool. Some of the engineers of the council said couldn't be done. I remember one of the engineers saying, but it'll flood. And I went, yeah, right, well that's water. It'll flood.
Water in, water out. I'll get Shane to talk a little bit more about that in the development, because it almost didn't happen as a people's park. It was right up until the end that it was going to be a casino and high rises and a concrete.
All sorts of things which we would not have liked.
No, not at all. You mentioned the fact that you live and play in that area now. As to many, well, you know, you go and have dinner down at South Bank.
Walk about
It really did physically change the geography of this part of our city.
It changed the geography of this part, but it also gave people who lived in the outer suburbs, people who didn't have swimming pools in their backyards, it gave people a chance to come and eat outdoors. I mean, I think one of the great lifestyle changes at Expo was that whole idea of eating outdoors, which the state government had previously told us could not happen because dust and flies. We choke on the dust, be carried off by the flies, but Expo proved that it wasn't. And people of my parents' generation would have tea at 5 o'clock. And then, I don't know, go to bed or read a book or
Listen to the
radio. But people actually discovered eating out was nice, and eating out at night's nice.
Not only did they discover eating out, it were probably not at the time even realised, but then they became a part of our everyday existence, didn't they? We talk about some of the art, and we'll certainly speak more about that when we have the second panel, but it's lovely to have these lasting physical monuments that we have now around the city and around the state that remind those of us who are there or be able to tell the story of Expo.
And we should pay tribute to Peter Racy. Oh, there he is standing here. You know, the Expo Art Trail has been one of Peter's babies for many years, and Peter has been to visit in my garage and found all the things that I have, not the art in my garage, but lots of papers and memorabilia. So he's been dogged in his pursuit of keeping Expo alive, and I think we should pay tribute to him.
Yeah,
With the art was that there was always a concern, because John Custer in particular had pulled some very valuable pieces of art from all around the world. And
he had very strong ideas.
very strong ideas about it. And there was always that thing, God, we've got all of this stuff here. What are people going to damage it? And there was really very little, if any, vandalism or damage at all. And I mean, there were $1 million pieces of art around that site. And it was just, when things were done so well, everyone was so happy, nothing was touched.
Because
I think that was very important. Everybody said it couldn't be done. People from the south said, Brisbane, Expo, gosh, it would be chaos. Why would we want it? And then people came and went, wow, isn't this fantastic? So for us, there was that element of, we've showed you, and for other people, it was the element of surprise. And therefore, perhaps because their expectations were rather low, they enjoyed it even more.
and we're so glad that they did. Please put your hands together for our We'll have main meal served now, and then we'll be back up.